Kenny again. Welcome to lesson 26. This is a piece called Morning Prayer by Peter Ilyitch Tchaikovsky. I know that's a kind of a crazy name there, you know, it's a Russian name, all right, and I'll get into a little more on that. But yeah, the P-Y-O-T-R is usually just pronounced Peter, all right, and it is. But don't get all spelling all crazy. That's just Tchaikovsky is what he's known for, and he's an extremely famous composer. He's a Russian. He was from 1840 to 1893. Although he was a Russian composer, he was trained in St. Petersburg, which actually had lots of French music teachers in there. So he learned all kinds of Western stuff, more German and Western styles and French styles than the actual Russian ones. There are lots of composers using Russian theme songs and stuff, and Tchaikovsky did a bit of that. But for the most part, he was a very, very Western composer, even though Russia, especially at the time, was so far away from what they knew as the West. The West was just Europe, you know, and just Moscow even was just so far away. But anyway, Tchaikovsky was an extremely good romantic composer. He was in the romantic era. His melodies, he's just full of melodies and just full of beautiful harmonies and just a wonderful composer. So I'll be teaching a few of his pieces, and there's lots of good stories about him. But in the meantime, we don't want to go on too long, but he was just wrote everything. Symphonies, ballets, you would know some of his ballets, of course, Swan Lake and Sweeping Beauty, and well, of course, at Christmas time, that Nutcracker Suite that drives everyone somewhat crazy a bit, but that's okay. But he wrote concertos, songs, operas, just everything. Now this little piece here called Morning Prayer is from a book called The Album for the Very Young. It's a set of fairly simple pieces that he wrote for children. And he's not the only composer that wrote for children. You know, Schumann and Mozart, they wrote little sets for children because they wanted children to be able to learn their stuff too, you know, so it was easier stuff. But this little thing called Morning Prayer, it's a beautiful little piece. It's a little bit complicated. I'm going to get into some weird things about it. But before I get on to teach it, as always, I will just play it for you. Now, on first listening, that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? Very nice little melody with some nice chords to it. But when I looked into this thing, I found it was a lot more difficult than I thought. Even more difficult than I expected at a grade 3 level. And it's got to do with something called voicing, which I haven't discussed, and pedaling, which I haven't discussed much. Now, what makes this difficult? If you look at it, I've got some phrases here. The melody is all in the top line. Very simple, and I recommend just practicing that melody. You just practice the very top line, okay? What makes it difficult is these other chords that you've got here. Now you can tell I'm playing it really choppy there, all right? Now this makes it very difficult because of the fingering, and there's a reason I didn't put fingering on the score, because I want you to put your own fingerings on. So if you're not going to use a pedal, which I'll get to in a moment, you want to make it so you can make some fingerings that make it as smooth as possible, because it's going to be very difficult. All right, this is in a really weird form. If you look at the score when I printed it out, I realized this is in choral form. All right, and what that means is there's 4 voices. Okay, you see down here you got a G, a D, a G, and a B. That actually represents the choral forms: the bass, the tenors, the altos, and the sopranos. So Tchaikovsky was kind of playing a trick here. He wrote a piano piece, but he wrote it as if a choir could sing it, and any choir could, and it would be a beautiful piece if they did. But to make it smooth, unfortunately, if you don't have really smooth fingering, it still sounds a little choppy, doesn't it? So here I go, on to that good old friend, the pedal. Now by adding the pedal, all you're doing is smoothing it out, all right? And this is a completely legal. Tchaikovsky's piano would have had pedals on it. He probably used it, all right? Not like Bach where he had a harpsichord, it had no pedals. So you can just be a lot smoother. Recommend just pedaling every chord and keeping them all smooth. You just hold it down, and then as soon as you change chords, you just lift up your foot and put it back down again. It smooths it out completely. Now do try to learn just the hard way, all right, especially when you're practicing your hands separately, which you should do with every piece. But that's still a bit clunky, but when you put the pedal into it, okay, so that was the second part of the melody there. Nothing too expensive. The left hand is a little hard too. Alright, it's hard. Alright, it's very tricky with those fingerings. Alright, just keep practicing. Write down your fingerings, but do use that pedal to smooth it out. Okay, and then when we get here, it just repeats the same melody line again. But then it comes into this really nice F sharp chord out of nowhere, all right? It started like the same melody. That's pretty much the whole piece. Okay, the second portion, which begins here. All right, I will move it up a bit so you can see a little more of it there. Okay, but there we go. Build up to that big F sharp chord, which comes out of nowhere. This is the key of G major, and that's a weird chord. But then it just resolves back into the G. Tell again, here's these crazy fingerings. If you look at the left hand here, okay, how do you do this? Okay, it is hard. I told you this is a lot harder than I thought it would be, but it's a beautiful melody. Keep it slow, all right? It's a slow piece. Don't worry about it. Now, on to the ending, which is just slightly different. Now this ending is a bit strange, okay? It's something what's sometimes called a coda. It's just, a coda is actually a Latin word for tail. It's just tagged on at the end, all right? So you're just finishing off your melody here. Okay, now if you notice, all the way right through to the end of the piece, you've got this G on your bass. Very different. It's almost all it does right through to the end. It's kind of like a chant kind of thing. It's just pulsating, all right? Except this gets a little more tricky. You have to notice here. You're going to do this with your thumb, basically. It's the easiest way. That's all the left hand. The hardest part is right in here. You've got to get this really practice with this one hard. Okay, where the tenor bass would be, all it's doing is and it's doing that right above that pulsating G. This is really awkward. It just sounds horrible, but that's the way it is. That's what he wrote. Okay, and notice all of these are tied over. You don't play them again, all right? This is a slur line, which is very confusing, all right? This is the melody, keeping it very smooth. But when you're tying to the same note, that means it is just held. So those last 3 bars, that's it. That's all you do. And all the right hand does in this code, in this ending. Again, try to get the fingering. And it does it again. And then it just does this. All right, again, practice the melody by itself sometimes. And then just get it all together, and it really sounds beautiful. Okay, just a beautiful little piece. It's a prayer. It's actually kind of a song. You can see it being sung to, maybe just for someone. It's from the album for the very young, maybe for a young child, just singing them a bedtime prayer. But just enjoy this piece. It's a lot difficult, okay? Getting that smoothness, the voicings, getting it smooth is a little bit tricky, but you'll work it out. Practice with the pedal, and that's the morning prayer. Okay, next lesson I'll be back. I'm going to do another lead sheet one. Danny boy, that should be a nice, interesting one. Okay, talk to you later.